My toxic sister crashed my wedding, claiming that my children were illegitimate because they were born before marriage. What she did next was so inappropriate that we had to call the police. I am 24 years old and got married about a week ago. Unfortunately, everything didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. Let me start from the beginning. I have an older sister, let's call her Stacy. She is 26. There has always been fierce competition between us, and that's putting it mildly. We hated each other as children because we were constantly trying to figure out who was better. We never got along, and as we grew older, our attitude towards each other didn't improve. Outwardly, we tried not to show our dislike to those around us, but inside, it was all boiling. Even our parents knew we didn't like each other but did nothing to reconcile us. I think this, to some extent, led to many problems. When Stacy turned 18, she left to study in college. I felt relieved because it meant I didn't have to walk on eggshells around her anymore. She only came home for holidays and always bragged about her successful life, as she was attending one of the best business schools in the state. I was a bit envious, but my main goal was to surpass her and get into an even more prestigious educational institution, and I succeeded. I got into an Ivy League university, and for Stacy, this was a big blow. My achievements were celebrated much more than hers. I thought that after this, our competition would end, but I was wrong. One day, she announced that she would start her own business with her father's help. She really managed to do it. I don't know if luck or her efforts played a role, but a few years ago, her business took off, and she moved to Japan to develop it. She was incredibly successful, and our parents were proud of her. This happened about 2 years ago, and since then, she has been living in Japan. Unfortunately, things didn't go so well for me after university. Stacy's successes only amplified my disappointment. I found a job, but it was far from what I had dreamed of, so I quit almost immediately. This turned out to be a huge mistake, and I realize that now. But at the time, it seemed to me that I had to surpass my sister instead of focusing on myself and my career. It was stupid. I regret it, but nothing can be changed now. After I quit my job, there was a period when I simply waited for luck to come to me, but this didn't happen, and I began to fall into depression. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that Stacy's business was going great, and my parents constantly boasted about her successes. I hated it, but couldn't say a word without risking seeming like a jealous sister. Despite the fact that I really felt these emotions, I had to hide them during family meetings and pretend that I was happy for Stacy because other emotions seemed unacceptable. Around that time, I met my husband Jackson, who is 25. I am incredibly glad that this happened because getting to know him literally changed my life. At that time, about 6 months had passed since I quit my job, and I was still hoping for some prospect, but luck didn't smile at me. As I said, I was depressed and very disappointed with my life, so I downloaded a dating app. I wasn't looking for serious relationships. I just wanted to distract myself and use meeting a guy as a way to forget how badly things were going for me. I barely had enough money for rent and the purchase of the most necessary things. I depended on financial help from my parents. They sent me money every month. I had some savings, but it wasn't enough, and I was barely coping with paying the bills. I promised my parents every month that I would return everything to them as soon as I could. There was always disappointment in their voices, and it was driving me crazy because I understood that I wasn't coping. It was especially hard to realize that Stacy was much more successful than me, and I looked like a complete failure in the eyes of my parents. I started using the dating app constantly, and random encounters with men who I didn't even particularly like helped me distract myself from negative emotions, and for a while, it worked. For several weeks, I went on dates with men who only wanted relationships without obligations. Everything was pretty superficial, but the situation changed when I met Jackson. He immediately caught my attention. He was an interesting interlocutor and suited me in all respects. He was an excellent student in school, and after graduation, he went to culinary school and worked in a restaurant. When we met, he turned out to be funny, charming, and with the right balance of masculinity. However, at that moment, I immediately told him that I wasn't looking for anything serious. When he invited me on a date after almost 2 weeks of correspondence, he immediately informed me that he was looking for serious relationships and wasn't interested in anything fleeting. He was dating to get married. I liked his honesty, and therefore I decided to give us a chance, not imagining what lay ahead. I agreed to the first date with Jackson out of curiosity. The date was incredible. It felt like we had known each other for many years. I think it was the best date of my life. We had a great time with him, and for the first time, I felt that I didn't need to prove anything. This was a pleasant contrast to how I usually feel in the company of other people. The conversation was easy, and understanding arose between us right away. I don't know what changed, but I decided to give our relationship a chance. We went on a couple more dates, and 3 months after the start of the relationship, I found out that I was pregnant. The only thing I was worried about then was how Jackson would react to this news. Nothing else bothered me. By that time, he already knew everything he needed to know about me. In the first weeks of the relationship, I told him about myself and my family, especially about how my sister and I had been competing all our lives, trying to surpass each other. But being with Jackson made me want to become better, to become myself. I knew as much about him as he knew about me. Moreover, it was he who pushed me to get out of a depressive state and actively look for work instead of just waiting for something to come to me. As a result, I returned to my old job at the same company I had left, and I think this was one of the best decisions in my life. When I found out about the pregnancy, I had no particular reason for concern. By that time, I had been working for about a month, and my relationship with Jackson was going great. The only thing that worried me was how he would perceive this news. Most guys would have considered it too early and, frightened, could have left, but deep down, I really wanted to keep the baby because it seemed like the right thing to do. It's hard to explain in words, but I felt ready to become a mother. To my surprise, when I told Jackson about the pregnancy, he supported me. He said that it was my body and only I could decide what to do next, and he would stay with me in any case. When I said I wanted to keep the baby, he was happy. He admitted that deep down, he had hoped that I would want to keep the baby because he also felt ready. Despite the fact that we were young and had been together for only 3 months, he said that he didn't want to seem crazy or too insistent, so he left the decision to me. But my choice made him the happiest person in the world. We agreed that despite the pregnancy, we wouldn't rush into marriage and would first get to know each other better. This was our joint decision. And a couple weeks later, we found out that we would have twins. This was another big surprise, but we accepted it with joy. After that, Jackson moved in with me, and around the same time, I met his parents. His parents turned out to be very nice people. They seemed to love all their children equally and never forced them to compete with each other. They had a healthy family, and I saw such a thing for the first time because I had no such experience myself. However, I was a little hesitant to introduce Jackson to my family because I knew that my parents would hardly approve of my life choices. I was a capable student with great prospects, and now I had decided to have children with a man I barely knew, and I had moved in with him. Any parents could have disapproved of such a thing, and mine would probably have been shocked. Therefore, I postponed this moment until my stomach began to round out, and it became clear that I could no longer hide anything. I organized a meeting with them in the 4th month of pregnancy and decided to tell them everything. I invited my parents to my home and asked Jackson to be there for moral support. They knew that I had been dating him for some time, but they didn't know that we were living together and that I was going to become the mother of his children. When I told them everything, I expected them to be angry, to shout, or something like that, but their reaction was completely unexpected. They were happy for me. They were delighted, hugging me and congratulating me on the pregnancy. When I told them that I would have twins, my mom almost fainted from happiness. It was an unexpected reaction, but I was glad that they weren't angry with me. Moreover, after learning about this, they even threw me a party and announced to everyone that they would soon become grandparents. I also told them that we, Jackson and I, didn't want to get married just because of the children. We decided to live together for a while before making such a serious decision, and they agreed with this. They supported us in everything, and this amazed me, but in a good way. I was incredibly grateful that my parents were on my side because I wouldn't have been able to bear it if they had turned away from me or tried to change my decision. I even talked to my parents about how they supported me and admitted that I hadn't expected such a thing from them. They said that they understood. In childhood, they weren't good parents for us because they never stopped the rivalry between my sister and me. It seemed to them that they were doing us a favor by constantly pushing us to achieve more. But over time, they realized that this could harm us in the long run. This thought came to them when they learned that I had quit my job because I wanted to achieve more. They realized that my decision was partly dictated by the fact that Stacy had started her own business and had achieved success, and I wanted to do something of my own to surpass her. It seemed strange to me that they knew about this because I hadn't told them, but they said that as parents, they just felt it and felt their responsibility. They wanted me to know that it didn't matter who among us was more successful, and I didn't need to constantly compete with Stacy to prove my worth. They loved me and would continue to love me, regardless of my successes, and they were equally proud of both of us because we always tried our best. That was the main thing for them. This conversation was very important, and I was glad that we discussed everything. It greatly eased my condition both during pregnancy and after. I could freely ask my parents for help with the children while Jackson and I worked. They told me that they had tried to have a similar conversation with Stacy, but apparently it didn't work out as they expected. She just laughed and said that she didn't need to hear such things because she sincerely believed that I was a pathetic loser. This is exactly why I had a nervous breakdown, and my parents decided to be lenient, assuring us that they were equally proud of us. But Stacy knew the truth, as she claimed. She simply refused to accept that my parents were really trying to change and become better. Stacy was convinced that she deserved more love because, by her standards, she had achieved greater success. My parents said they would talk to her again when she came home for the holidays because online communication would not replace a live conversation. They promised me that they would talk to her to get her to stop this endless competition. Until that moment, Stacy did everything possible to make me feel bad. Since I announced my pregnancy, she began sending me sarcastic compliments and making cutting remarks in the family chat, which were completely inappropriate. And her goal was to humiliate me and make me regret the pregnancy. Although I never felt that I had any reason to be ashamed, for her it was an obvious failure because, in her opinion, I had gotten pregnant before marriage and was living with a man I barely knew. For her, this was a huge victory, and she thought she could say anything to me. This began to get on my nerves, and I several times thought about leaving the family chat, but my parents persuaded me to stay, explaining that they were trying to become better and wanted the family to stick together. For their sake, I stayed. My parents promised that they would put an end to the bullying and at least try to do everything possible. If they didn't succeed, I could always leave the chat. When Stacy came home for Christmas, my parents said they were going to talk to her, and they really did. Unfortunately, by that time, she had gone too far in her dislike for me. Her only goal in life was to humiliate me and make me feel like a nobody. That year, she was simply unbearable, although over the past couple of years, she had already managed to annoy everyone with her bragging about her successful business. That year, everything got even worse. She returned from Japan, well aware that I was pregnant and that my achievements and income were incomparable to hers. She didn't miss a single opportunity to remind me of this. All the time, she boasted about her achievements, threw contemptuous glances at me, or even asked if I was happy for her. I felt very uncomfortable and unpleasant. I left the family party early because I was trying with all my might not to break down and cry in front of everyone. After that Christmas holiday, my parents tried to talk to her to get her to stop, but she said that she had worked hard to achieve her position and wouldn't let me take it away from her, so she would boast as much as she wanted, and I would have to put up with it. At that moment, I decided to break off all ties with her and left the family chat. My parents also thought that this would be the best solution. We didn't communicate for 2 years, and I didn't know what she was doing, but recently, several relatives told me that she had returned from Japan with a child. I first learned about this about 4 weeks ago. They say it's a wonderful child who is only 2 months old. My parents told me that they had communicated with Stacy via video link several times before her return, but never noticed anything suspicious, not even a hint that she was pregnant. She explained that she wanted to surprise everyone and announced that she had become a mother and had recently married the father of her child. According to her, the wedding took place a year ago in a private ceremony. Now she was ready to share this with everyone. The timing of her announcements looked suspicious because the whole family knew that my wedding was supposed to take place around the same time, but thanks to her, everyone was now only talking about her marriage and daughter. She explained that her husband had stayed in Japan due to a lot of work, and she had come with the child to introduce him to the family. I tried not to pay attention to this because I was getting married, and it was supposed to be a special moment. Even after her return, I avoided communicating with her. Unfortunately, this didn't help because she still found a way to ruin my day. She appeared at my wedding without an invitation, right after the ceremony. I honestly was grateful that everything that happened took place after we exchanged vows. She crashed my wedding, and seeing her among the guests, I almost lost my temper. But Jackson and my parents helped me calm down. It seemed she had sneaked in here, and if I had made a scene, it would have only played into her hands, making my wedding day all about her. We decided that as long as she didn't do anything critically terrible, it was worth letting her stay and deal with her later. The wedding took place on my aunt's farm, so we didn't have strict security, which allowed her to enter without an invitation. Now I regret that I didn't spend more money on security because then many problems could have been avoided. The whole time Stacy was at the wedding, she told everyone how happy she was thanks to her wonderful child and how my children were illegitimate and didn't count because they were born before marriage. This was incredibly offensive, and Stacy said this to everyone she talked to at my wedding. Later, guests came up to me and told me about it, and I had to just smile and let it go to avoid a quarrel with her and not spoil my day. It was very difficult, but somehow I coped. At one point, I almost broke down, but before I could say anything, the police burst into the room. I had no idea what was happening, but the police blocked the exits and locked us all inside. After a few seconds, they arrested Stacy. It was a shock. Some woman was screaming, crying, and holding a child who was supposed to be my sister's child, claiming that it was her child. After that, everything turned into chaos statements, handcuffs, and so on. Only much later did it become clear that this child was not Stacy's child at all. It turned out that all the photos she showed were taken from her friend's social networks, and she just inserted herself into them using Photoshop. The most terrible thing about this was that every time she met with us and showed us the child, she was actually just babysitting for her friend. After returning from Japan, she lived with this friend because she had terminated the lease on her apartment and was currently looking for new housing. She helped with the child for free, and that's why she never invited her parents or relatives to visit, but only visited them herself. On the day of my wedding, she decided to go even further and show up there with the child without the friend's consent. She took the child while the friend and her husband were sleeping and then stopped answering calls. Because of this, her friends had to involve the police to arrest her. Fortunately, she constantly talked about my wedding and how she wanted to ruin it, so her friends were able to guess where she might be and then found and arrested her. This is literally madness, and I can't believe this happened, but it really did happen to my family and me. It's hard to realize all this, but the fact that Stacy was too competitive is one thing, but realizing that she was ready to go to such extreme psychotic measures to prove to my parents that she was better than me is truly disturbing. At the moment, she is at her friend's house because she perfectly understands that she will not win this case and will end up in prison. At the moment, she hasn't been imprisoned yet, but for some reason, she blames me for everything. She claims that I got married just to spite her. Let's not forget that I hadn't spoken to her for almost 2 years and hadn't spoken to her since our last argument. Moreover, I was generous enough to allow her to stay at my wedding because I didn't want to make a scene and humiliate her. She turned my wedding day into some kind of circus. If anything, I should be the one blaming her. Yesterday, she contacted me and said that I needed to convince her friends that I had supposedly driven her crazy with my wedding and children, and that's why she acted so recklessly. In response, I said that I would like her to end up in prison because that's where she belongs, or in a psychiatric clinic because she really is abnormal. But now my parents think that I should help her and convince her friends that she was out of her mind because I had tormented her with news of my marriage and children. They think I should do this so that her friends will withdraw the statement and she won't be arrested for the time being. Since she lived with them and looked after their child, the situation is complicated, and the police cannot decide what to do without the consent of her friends. If she hadn't lived with them and hadn't been looking after their child, the case would have been simpler, would have been kidnapping, but here, everything is more complicated, so Stacy has so far avoided arrest. She claims that she had the consent of the parents to take the child with her, but this has not yet been confirmed, and she has not yet been held accountable. All that needs to be done is to convince the friends to withdraw the statement, but I'm not sure I want to do that. I really don't think she deserves my help. However, my parents think that if I refuse, it will be wrong. So the question is, am I really doing wrong if I want my sister to go to prison? As always, I suggest writing your answer to this question in the comments, and we will move on to the update. Update 1. So I decided to completely sever ties with my family, including my parents. Yes, they helped me a lot during pregnancy and after the birth of the children, but now I need space. At the moment, whether they support me or not is secondary. I just want to be with my husband and children, and I won't be able to do this if I continue to get involved in their drama. I want to abstract from the situation because it greatly affects my psychological state. I am grateful to my parents for everything they did after I announced my pregnancy, but I am just tired of everything that concerns Stacy. I think everyone understands why I don't want to help her. She doesn't deserve my help, and she dug this hole for herself, so let her get out of it herself. Jackson thinks this is the right decision, and that's all for this update. Update 2. I just learned from several relatives that Stacy has serious problems. Her friends have decided to proceed with the case and take it to the end. So far, Stacy has claimed that she had the consent of her friends to take the child whenever she wanted, but proving this in court will be extremely difficult given her behavior at my wedding and the fact that she passed the child off as her own. I don't see how she can get out of this situation. It's sad, but honestly, I'm not surprised. With my parents, I still haven't talked and don't think I will, until they recognize that I did the right thing and apologize for asking me to help my sister. Of course, I am demanding a lot, but I don't want to communicate with them until they realize how much they spoiled our childhood with Stacy. They must understand that this is partly their fault. Update 3. Hello. So now there is a trial over Stacy and we don't know how it will all end for her. She is facing about 5 years in prison if she is found guilty. However, given her unstable mental state, the sentence may be reduced. In any case, it's no longer our concern. We, Jackson and I, are still going on a honeymoon and will try to somehow make up for the terrible wedding. I can't ask my parents to babysit the children since we are still not talking, so I will have to ask Jackson's parents for help. I really hope that our honeymoon will be better than the wedding. Be sure to write in the comments what you think about this whole story. Honestly, I thought that Stacy's friends would still withdraw the statement. It's strange that they didn't withdraw it, but on the other hand, it's understandable. Of course, there is some kind of crazy stuff here. I agree with the author that the parents are to blame for the fact that such a competition developed between them. They should have stopped it. And it would be interesting to know how things would have turned out if the author had surpassed her sister. Would she have taken revenge like Stacy did? Of course, she is completely not. Well, okay, rejoice. Maybe even a little bit of shame. Well, that's all. Why spoil everything further? Although the feeling that I was in some kind of update of mine in Japan and that all this is fiction didn't leave me until the last moment, but no, this is life. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write if you agree with me or if you have any other opinion. Also, watch our other videos and good luck to you.